Heard the camera on.
Greetings, Mark Grang here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun. And today my guests are three Democratic representatives, House of Representatives. David Paige, Conway, Steve Woodcock, Conway, and Anita Burrough, District, what are you?
Two.
District 2, which is, I think I'm going to get this. Bartlett, Jackson, Hales, Harts, Chatham, Albany, and Sandwich.
You got it.
Ta-da, okay.
Yes.
It is the strangest district.
I love it. I love Sandwich is the best addition ever.
Really?
Yeah. Great town.
Yeah, it's a nice, very nice
Yeah.
town. So we got a lot to cover. Why don't we start off with the budget? Governor Ayotte now unveiled their budget, and it's a $16 billion every 2-year budget, which is up quite a bit from the last biennium, I think, right? 15 billion to 16 billion, roughly. So it's going up, but she said she cut 150 million out of it, and it all seems pretty good, just come on its face. But what happened to all the budget problems that people were talking about, including the Sununu Center, that could have a liability of hundreds of millions?
That hasn't gone away.
All right, so
gone
Anita,
away.
start since you're starting.
Well, first of all, I think we still have a problem. I think Governor Sununu left us with a budget mess. I think she said something. She was going to cut 6% off the budget, which was less than we thought it was going to be. But the wisdom is that the cuts that the state makes are going to be passed on to the local communities, and the taxpayer is going to bear that. So, yes, there'll be no new state taxes, but they're going to shift down the road.
So are there anything specific that's going to be like what?
Well, she did reinstate, and Steve, you can answer this better than me. Some of the money that was cut from special ed was reinstated. Now that money was going to be a real hardship for the towns, but and you can also answer better in terms of education, how much of that is going to be borne by the towns if that's cut.
Steve?
Well,
And the budget in general.
Yeah, budget in general. I think the caveat was she indicated that these are initial revenue speculations. I think it's going to fall out that when the time actually comes, they aren't going to be accurate. That's the first thing. I think that the funding, a lack of funding across, particularly in more education, I'm aware of. I mean, we've done a really nice job maintaining our status under her budget, being the last place in the United States for support of college education, unfortunately. The public schools, the money that Anita was talking about, special education, well, hell, Frank just cutting it. I mean, it's not like he's doing us a big favor. They're still not funding it. And you have hanging over the Rand case and the Claremont case. Those two things are still in the court. And if they come down this year to her budget, add it to the Sununu Center, because that's going to be hundreds of millions.
So that Sununu thing hasn't. When is that going to be realized?
Oh, boy.
Is it just case by case?
There's 1,200 cases.
Right.
Yeah.
1,200 cases.
And David, by the way, David is the incoming chair of the Carroll County Democrats. So, one thing, just as an aside before, go ahead. So one thing, David, about the budget, what happened to all this COVID money that supposedly went away? Because the state budget is what, 40, 50% from the feds?
Yep.
The whole state budget? So I thought the COVID money was going away, therefore it was going to create this big deficit.
That's my understanding too. And I think, if we were having this conversation in another week, I think we would have a lot more to say. She presented the budget yesterday, but frankly, the devil's going to be in the details. And, she presented her budget in broad strokes and her goals in broad strokes, but she hands the budget over to House Finance today. And so that's when we're really going to start looking at line items and all the details of what she's proposing and have a lot better sense of, where those cuts are hitting. She said a lot of things yesterday that sounded good, and that we stood up and clapped for. She said we're going to put more money towards special education. She talked about mental health, which are all things, that I'm supportive of providing more funding for. But the question is, where's the rest of the money going, and what has been cut? So when we see that detail, I think we'll know a lot more. I mean, I think probably starting today and through the weekend and into next week, as House Finance really starts digging in, we'll have a lot more information. You know, I think she said some good things yesterday. She said some other things that I don't like. She talked about, she seemed to indicate that she wants universal eligibility for the voucher program.
Right.
So, you know, she said, we're going to be providing record funding for education. But what's included in that? Is that a lot? Is a lot of that the voucher money? So I think as we start digging into these budget details, we'll have a much better sense of what we're looking
And
at.
she basically said that anything bad happened is going to be the Democrats' fault, which I found pretty. She actually
Now,
did. So it was pretty amusing.
Speaking of that, I just wanted to point out that, I mean, we are really, the Valley is really sort of like an oasis of Democrats. I mean, because the House went from being very close last time to, well, like a 40 member swing now.
Yep.
And, you know, Berlin went all Republican. Certainly the south of us with Gordelli and Patnell.
All the boroughs are still Republican.
The what?
All the boroughs.
Yeah, all the
Upper
boroughs,
Borough, Molten
right?
Borough, Wolf
all the
Borough.
rich people.
Yep.
So
About that, but yeah.
it is, you guys really are a little bit of an oasis, is that true? I mean, obviously Dover, and there must be some other enclaves of liberal, fascist liberals down there
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, but oasis is a nice sounding term. How about just stuck on an island? It could be more appropriate,
Right,
you know?
Depends where you are, and it also depends on what committee you're in.
Yeah.
I do want to say, just jump back quick
Yeah.
on your COVID money, Mark. That was all federal excess. That wasn't part of our budget. So when it's gone because the COVID money is gone. The federal improvement of school money is gone. So all the money that came in the last 2-3 years, because they had 3-4 years to get rid of it, to use it. So it wasn't like it all came in 2022, we had COVID, it was gone. They could spread out over a certain time window. Those time windows are December 31, they're done. So that's why it's not there. But that wasn't budget impact. That was a lot of stuff that got done.
And gone.
One way
Spent-
it's gone.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But one thing that, speaking of that, one little detail is that the Fed money for EV stations, and I don't know if it's AOT that cut this or the Feds did, but there was like $17 million to the state. And one detail was that only 4 stations had been built in the state.
Right.
It's like, is that a bureaucratic mess or what? I mean, Elon's got probably 100 of them or 200 in the state, and the state with all this federal money can't put more than 4 in? How does that work? Do you know?
I don't.
I don't know offhand, but I think it's a problem. I recall not at the last Chamber of Commerce Expo, but the prior one, there was a great session, educational session there about EV infrastructure, and I can still picture the diagram they had, which they called the donut hole, which is basically how this EV infrastructure is going in all around New Hampshire. And yet here in the middle is this donut hole of New Hampshire where we're really just not putting in that EV infrastructure at the rate we need to, and how that could impact particularly tourism down the road as folks are looking around and saying, like, I don't even see how I can get up here, you know? So I think it is, you know, and it's not necessarily a problem that becomes urgent tomorrow, but as we're thinking long term and thinking about planning for this transition, it will be a problem.
So
if
you're
we don't
saying
address
that
it.
New Hampshire's the donut hole.
New Hampshire's
And
the
so,
donut hole.
and Sununu has always had, former governor's always had connections to public service and all that. So do you think there was that it was purposefully not being installed, those EV stations? Or do you?
I know the legislature last year wasn't very supportive of it. And
Was or wasn't?
Was not. And they had the first 2 years ago, even the bills that came in about putting in stations aware and the funding for those. So they've never been supportive.
Right.
I do just, it's funny, you go into, we had 2 stations in the legislative parking deck. And the first thing that went was the 2 stations in the parking deck. So if you drive there, you're stuck, I guess, in Concord. But yeah, so they're not very supportive of it. I don't see that on her or on the new governor's list of priorities at all.
Speaking of the budget, Anita, I mean, one thing that struck me is because we don't have the interest and dividends tax, right? And that's sort of an income tax, so people pay interest and dividends. And that's $160 million that won't be in the budget this year because that's what it normally raised. And I guess there were a couple of Democratic, and just so people know, we're only in the House, all the stuff that's coming up is just the House proposed. I mean, it's
Right.
got to go through the Senate and all that stuff. So
Right,
this is
long
just
way
the
to go.
beginning.
And then direct to the governor.
But what struck me is that out of the 52% of the interest and dividends tax in the state is paid by only 1,700 people who pay taxes out of 725,000 people.
Right.
So how do you explain, I mean, to me, gosh, it seems like a pretty easy progressive tax to get some money from basically wealthy people. And the conservatives...
I actually am an advocate of bringing it back and carving out an exception for individuals who depend on that money to live on.
How do you do that?
Say that if you have if you're by income,
Okay.
if I don't know exactly how they do it, but there are some people, seniors and other people who don't have a lot of other money, and they do depend on that to live on. But so I'd like to see that brought back. And I think doing away with it is all part of the, what do they say at the well about taxes all the time? What's that saying that the Republicans?
Taxation is theft.
Taxation is theft. It's all part of that whole thinking. It's theft, and it's an income tax, and it's got to go away. But I think that was a big mistake, doing away with that.
You guys have any thoughts on that?
And back to Anita's point, it's not like the needs disappear, so we have to fund those same services that were being provided by the state in some other way. Yep. So when we eliminate this tax on ultra wealthy granite staters,
Less than 1%.
it's not like the need for that revenue disappears. It's just shifted down onto other taxpayers. So that's my perspective on it. Is it's regressive, and
I mean, that's what Republicans would say, though. You say need. You guys say need, that we need the revenue. Republicans would say, well, we need a little less revenue. We can just cut the budget.
Well, the Republicans say their position, at least on the floor, and Jason's position, who's the spokesperson on the floor, says it's not about expenses, it's about revenue. It's not about revenue, it's about expenses. You guys are just spending too much, so we just cut back, and that's their. But if you're in the top 1%, it's probably not a big bother to you. The problem is we've been funding ongoing state budget for years, depending on that, and we snuck through the last 3 or 4 years because all the excess federal money that sort of made that buffer. Mm-hmm. And when the governor left, between that and the business tax, that's a hole, and it's as big a hole than the EV hole. There's no place to go with it. I mean, there's no other way to get there except eliminate programs.
Yeah, I mean, it just and
that's people.
But the interest and dividends thing, Nita, when you're saying people who depend on it, I think I have this right. One, it's only 5% on interest and dividends, and I think there's like a $2,500 threshold. I mean, so you have to have a lot of interest and dividends to start paying that tax. So that surprised me. I mean, nobody wants taxes, but that's just like an easy one to grab some money from people who are wealthy.
Sure, and I think like Joyce Craig's position when she was running for governor was, let's basically up that threshold, so that folks who are, in the camp that Anita's talking about, say somebody who is retired, has a nest egg, but it's not an exorbitant amount of money, that we're not kind of capturing those fewer people who are paying that at that bottom, but that folks who are, we're talking, I think a majority of it was paid by people who have like at least 5 million, that's returning this interest in dividends. So, I mean, who do we want to be paying that money? Folks who have $5 million in the bank.
I didn't hear the public have any outrage about the tax.
Right.
And a decision was
I'm
made
not
to
sure the
do
public
away.
pays attention to that. You say, well, I don't have $1 million. I don't have $5 million. I don't have $1 million. I'm not gonna, I can't even think about that tax. So it can't be that much. I mean, we've been talking federally. How many years have you heard federally every time there's a presidential election? Oh, you're going to go to the top 1%, the top 3%, or 5%, or 4%, whatever it is, of ratepayers. And the same thing with this. It's only less than 1%. I mean, but it doesn't impact the average person. I'm not sure they really understand that. They will when they start to see less services. And the only way it's going to be less services, as we said before, is if it's a service that really needs to be done, then the towns and municipalities have to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the interest in dividend, not to harp on that, but I mean, it's one thing to have interest in dividends. I mean, it's one thing that people have stocks and they appreciate their stocks, but that's not what they're talking about. I mean, that's literally interest in dividends. You have to have a lot of dividend-paying stocks. Anyway, the other thing that's a little bit of a surprise, I think it happened yesterday or the day Thursday, was the right to work vote.
Oh, yeah.
And that, because the Republicans always want to get rid of the right to work, and they want to make it a right to work state, I should say, and basically it would not require people to join a union. So I guess it failed. So let me put it this way. So most Republicans want to have a right to work state. It turned out that all the Democrats voted against it, but then you had like 25 or so Republicans who joined you. So that's probably the only vote you're going to get all session where you're going to get some crossover like that. So the first question is, and you all can weigh in on this, like how many union people are there in the state outside of municipalities? I mean, is it even a big deal?
I don't know.
I guess what I'm asking.
I don't know that number, Mark, but it is a big deal because it impacts. I think first off, the title is wrong. Anybody can go to work. I mean, it's not like you can't go to work.
Right.
And no one is required to join a union. If there's a union in the shop, then they don't have to join it. And what did we say yesterday? The law started in 1949. You don't have to join that union, but you have to pay an equal service, equal fee, agency fee, if you're saying education, for that cost of that representation. Because you are benefiting by the union. You're benefiting by the grievance. If you are a non-union member, I remember when I was a principal, if you were a non-union member in a school and there was a grievance, that collective bargaining group had to represent you. The same thing there. So they have an agency fee, and that's what that cost goes. So it's theoretically allows the worker, or the owner of the business, more opportunity for more profit because you can hire lower rates, hire more people. So I don't think I think it is a big issue. Fire, police, emergency services, carpenters, laborers, everyone that's trying to make a living, make a decent wage and have a pension, they're all unionized in terms of the labor industry. They have been for years.
But are they mostly, do you guys know, maybe not exact numbers, but I mean, unless there are some big businesses down in the southern part of the state, I mean, I can't imagine there's a union in the valley except for the school and the police, and are the police unionized? I don't even know that. But
schools are an association, but yeah, I know what you mean.
what are teachers? I mean, since you were vice principal, right? Is that
was a principal, but yeah.
Principal. Well, principal.
Not here.
Okay, but you've been a principal.
Yes.
So you were vice principal here, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So what would the average dues be for a teacher, like now, about?
Boy, I don't know. I haven't
I mean, what?
I don't know. It's maybe $1,000 a year.
Oh, is it?
Maybe $100 a month, something similar to that.
Right.
Every union is different. But it's a percentage, so I don't know what that figure is. But it's I got in all honesty, transparency. I was raised in a union family. My father was a topographer. He was in the newspaper business, and it worked out back. So he was. I mean, I can remember being on the strike line with him. I was 10 years old. I mean, so it does. I'm biased. I think it does put, for the average working guy, it provides some opportunity and some stability of wages and security.
I remember just a quick story with the Washington Post when they went from typographers, the old school, to the computer stuff. They had to pay the union for like 10 years for all the pages they didn't create.
Right.
I mean, that's, but anyway. Anita, anything on the right to work?
Yeah, I thought it was the two speeches, one by a Dem and one by a Republican, were really interesting. Our parliamentarian Lucy Weber said that they were two of the best speeches she had ever heard. Because the Republican told it from the Republican perspective, and our person, but reached over the aisle, and our person did the same. One of the reasons that those Republicans voted for right to work was because President Trump was now turned and said he was against right to work and he was supporting unions. So I think I do think that was a part of it. And the other reason was that 30,000 people went online to oppose it, which is a huge number. Sometimes we'll get 1,000, or 1,500 on a big bill. 30,000 was huge. So, but I do think that Trump changed his tune on that, made a difference to some of the Republicans.
I would be a little more down to earth on that. Yes, they said take it on the national platform. In our little state, in our little legislature, I think the reality was, Mike, that most of the people that came over were union members.
Oh.
They were union. They had to be Republican by party.
Right.
I'm the only Democrat in my party. My whole family, including my union father, was all Republican. But I think it was union members that came over that Republican. I don't think there's a lot of philosophical change there. And I think, to me personally, I haven't looked at. I will see the roll call today, but I haven't seen it because I have to write an article. But I haven't seen it this week. Who vote? But that'd be my guess that was a big part of the people that came over because they held the payback. I mean, if you saw already, American Prosperity said they're going to see who didn't vote with them and why. So it's. I think that there's substantial reason. That would be my bottom line guess that they are union members.
Yep. David, thoughts?
I don't have too much more to add. I think labor also did a great job with their outreach. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we won that vote because labor was organized, and they were reaching out to everybody. They were reaching out to Democrats to make sure everybody showed up that day, and
We
they
all
were
got
reaching
phone
out,
calls.
and they were reaching
Yeah.
out to Republicans to persuade them. So, I think we got to give credit where credit is due, and it's labor did the work to get it passed.
So if we were a right-to-work state, then, because now you said, Steve, people don't have to join the union, but you have to pay the dues.
No, I said they have to pay an agency fee. A fee equal to what typically it's equal to what the union dues would be. But since 1949, you don't have to join the union. You still can you can work in any union shop you want, while you pay an agency fee.
So the idea of being right to work is that, so the union would have less fees.
If you break the union, you have no fees. You have no control of labor. You have no control of benefits. And there's no more union. So if it's just an open market, you can have people who are they're going to die, and it's going to all filter back down. That the people who are working at the bottom levels are going to go back to getting horrible pays and no benefits. And big business or small business are going to do much better off in the businessman's pocket, but not in the people who are workers. This is a worker-focused bill.
No, I get that. I just, I have to admit, I'm anti-union in the sense that I see the steel mill went down, the newspaper industry went down with unions, the auto industry went down with unions. I mean, it has to be Tesla. I mean, there's a whole bunch of new car manufacturers in the South that aren't unionized, and they pay well.
Yeah.
I mean, haven't we passed the need for unions? We don't need safety laws. We got OSHA and all that.
You're asking me? No.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. Hasn't that been has that been dismantled yet?
I think
By is it pronounced Doge? Is that
Some people say doggy.
Doggy. I
like that better.
And we're gonna have Kogi in New Hampshire.
Yeah, we do have Kogi in New Hampshire.
Are they calling it Kogi or Coge?
COGE.
Yeah, okay. But I think I'll parrot a couple points that we heard on the floor.
Okay.
And I'm sharing these. I have not verified these, but this is what was some of the things that were stated on the floor. One is that a lot of states that have passed right to work did so under the premise or that it would bring a lot more business to the state.
Okay.
So, for example, West Virginia. And they haven't seen that pan out, right? There was sort of this false promise of if we go right to work, all of a sudden all of these businesses will want to relocate here. And that hasn't panned out for those states. Something else that was mentioned is that where you have adjacent states, where you have one that's right to work and one that is not, the wages in the right to work state are not keeping up with those in the adjacent states. So I have not independently verified those, but those were points that were made on the floor in regard to that.
Wow.
So.
Okay. Something I think we just heard a little boom. It was either a sonic boom. That's not anything on our roof. We've never felt that. But anyway, sorry to little interruption here.
Apparently, they didn't like what Dave was saying.
Boy, hopefully it's not like a solar panel.
I thought it was a building noise, but
Yeah, it felt like. Anyway, sorry, we'll have to edit that out maybe. No, we're not. So moving on here. Let's so real estate. There were a couple interesting real estate bills that were approved and shot down. So one of them was this idea of that when a lease expires, that a landlord would or would not have a right to basically. Now, you guys say evict, which to me is a misnomer because if your lease expires, you're not being evicted. It's just the lease ends and you got to go. So that passed, right? The new
Passed in the House. Yep.
Okay. So anyway, is that what it is? Is that, I mean, one of the things that, and I've heard through people who long-term leases, they've got out of the long-term lease business and gone to the short-term lease because if they have a tenant that doesn't pay, they can't get them out.
Yep.
And they just want to be able to do something with their property. They don't want to be locked in forever with somebody who just renews their lease. So doesn't it seem, which seems fair to me, that if you own a property and your lease expires, you should be able to do what you want with your property. What's the counter argument to that?
Want me to grab this one?
yeah, absolutely.
This is a housing
I'll jump
thing.
in if you missed me. Go ahead.
So I think the first thing I need to say is, let me actually start with the definition of eviction here, and then I'll move on. So I think something to understand is that the area of statute that this modified is specific to the just causes for eviction. So what would happen is that the lease ends, if the tenant does not leave,
Right.
that becomes a just cause for an eviction. You would still go through an eviction process with the courts. Okay, so it is an eviction, whether you think it's a just one or not.
Okay.
It is modifying the statute related to eviction. It is very much about eviction. The second thing I'll say is, I don't think anybody who is on our side on this is saying that there are not real issues for landlords, especially small landlords who may be trying to deal with a tenant who may be causing some kind of issue, right? We're not saying that the eviction law as it's currently structured is perfect or that it's not worth our attention to try to make it easier for landlords who are facing some legitimate problems. Some of the reasons that this is problematic, a couple reasons. One is our current housing market. So we had the highest rate of increase in homelessness of any state in the nation, and we have a 0.8% vacancy rate, rental vacancy rate. What we heard again and again in testimony from New Hampshire Housing, from the New Hampshire Coalition to End Homelessness, from AARP, from disability rights advocacy folks, is the words that were used again and again were virtually everyone who is evicted under this law, should it pass, will experience some period of homelessness. So one issue I have with this is timing, frankly. We can talk about the principle of it, but then there's also the lived reality of it, of if this becomes law, what will the facts on the ground be? And it will be in a situation where we already have this really crisis level increase in homelessness, we will see more homelessness. So, yep.
No, this is great. And why is there a connection? So if a landlord can terminate a lease at its end, why would that necessarily lead to homelessness? Wouldn't they just be renting it to somebody else?
Potentially, yes. So first of all, there are many just causes for eviction. And back to my first point, that doesn't mean that the process is smooth.
Okay.
And we may need to look at making that process smoother for folks. But there are numerous reasons that you can evict a tenant. Like non-payment of rent, damage to the property, you want to rent it to your daughter who's moving home from college. There's many reasons that you can legitimately do that now. The question is, if you are just kind of sidestepping those just causes,
Right.
And you're going to rent to someone else, we are still experiencing population growth. You may be renting to someone from out of town. Where does that local person now go? So, if we had all the housing we needed, that would be one thing. But what we know is that most of the people who are displaced will not have a place to go. So that's my perspective on that. Is it's a timing thing and a current housing market thing that makes it the practical reality of it very problematic in terms of housing stability.
Go ahead.
The only other point I want to make is housing discrimination is illegal. It would remain illegal. Retaliation against tenants is illegal. It would remain illegal. However, this new just cause for eviction would make it very hard to prove those things in court. So if you have a new landlord coming in and that person is able to just let a tenant go because they're a member of a class that they're uncomfortable with, when they go to court, the judge will just ask, and we heard this again and again in testimony, well, what's the reason for the eviction? And if the landlord can say, well, the lease was up, they really have no leg to stand on. And examples that were given were, housing discrimination, but also somebody complaining that the heat isn't working, or somebody who rebuffed a sexual advance from a landlord, or any of these things. It becomes very, very, very hard for that tenant to marshal a defense. So my perspective personally is, I understand the landlord perspective. I am a small mom and pop landlord. I get it. We can work on solving that problem for landlords and making that eviction process smoother when there is a just cause. but I don't see this as the right answer. And that's
All
my
right.
take on it.
I mean,
All
go
right,
ahead,
I
and
see
I'll just
different
say,
way.
I'm just
Go
going
ahead.
to I'm just going to summarize, and one you can summarize what it says, because it's gone through the House, right? I
Yep.
mean,
Yep.
and it goes to the Senate, and then the governor would potentially sign into law, right? I mean, that's the process.
That's the process.
Okay, but I mean, all what you said, David, all makes sense, but it's really that, and like everything in life, is a balance between property rights. You own a piece of property, you should be able to do something with it. But go ahead.
Okay, let me give you the other side of that from my perspective.
There's another side. David just gave
No,
the other
David
side.
gave you the technical side. He gave you the real side.
You need a Republican here now.
It's like,
This
this
the boots on the
this is
ground
like a
side.
typical Democrat. You got 5 sides.
Yeah, two-sided coin.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
All right, here's my point, my concern. The reason most people under this bill, in my assumption,
Right.
is because they're going to jack rents. They're going to increase the rent, going to increase the profit. We have an older state, population-wise. The valley is full of older residents, and many, if they still have a place to rent, are renting. So now, imagine this picture. You're taking out older folks who have been there 20 years. But now the guy said, wow, under this bill, this is easy. I'm sorry, you're done. I really love you, but I can get $500 more a month, and I'm a businessman. And now they're out. So it goes back to that homelessness. But we're talking about forced homelessness for folks who hadn't even thought about that. So I see a real concern about folks with disabilities, and particularly seniors, particularly in this state, and particularly in this valley. I think that's the part that bothers me. This is just an up profit piece. It's not. That's what it is. It's saying the way out because the contract's over. Okay, I provided you what I said I was going to. You were a hell of a tenant, but now I get more money. So sorry, see you later. And so that's the part that makes me concerned. And there has to be something to give them some opportunity to stay there. If they've been doing their due diligence and paying their money and not causing problems and doing no damage, they've been there 20 years.
Okay, but the counter to that, unless you're talking about New York City rent control, even with the same tenant, the landlord could just raise the rent.
They can't at the end of each lease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then doesn't mean they're home. I mean, it's the same thing. You're saying, oh, they're gonna be out so they could get a higher rent, but they could just raise the rent on the person who's there.
And the ability of that person to pay
Right.
the rents that are available in this community.
Right. No, I realize it's like $2,000
okay,
for.
Yeah, so the rents. So the ability of the person, a senior, to pay, or anyone, a working young family. I mean, heck, you ain't what $1,200, $1,800 for a single apartment.
No, I get that. I just don't see how
so I
that.
think there has to be some reality on the ground of that we're a people. We are people in this state.
So will you advocate like rent control then? Because that's
No,
not.
I'm not advocating rent control. I'm advocating a little more humanity in some of the legislation we put through that doesn't force people out of the home, particularly in this time.
But they can.
Steve,
yeah.
that's why the governor was pointing at us and saying that we create problems for the state.
I did
That's
put
precisely
forward,
the problem.
I did put forward an amendment on the floor. I tried to find some kind of compromise on this. I put forward an amendment that would set a trigger point at a 2.5% rental vacancy rate. So basically tying it to, is there somewhere
Right.
for this displaced person to go? So a 5% rate is what's considered a balanced housing market by economists. And we said, all right, let's just give these folks a fighting chance.
Okay.
And so that was the compromise I tried to reach and failed.
Okay, so fair enough. So other real estate stuff, there was which I think failed or passed. It's funny, I read your chart and then I can't remember what it said. But about the purchase of homes, if one is up for sale, that would be like a 90-day grace period before a corporation could buy a home.
Right.
Did that pass or fail?
Failed.
Or is it?
I can talk about that one too if you want.
Yeah, okay.
Dave's
talking too
the
much.
housing guru.
I'm sorry to take all the oxygen.
No, you're a housing man.
He had it right there. Interview with Paige.
yeah,
Just a housing.
yeah.
Just defer to Governor Page here.
He
You
will be
may.
someday.
You may.
I know.
So this bill was actually problematic. And both Republicans and Democrats on committee had issues with this bill. It was technically flawed, well-intentioned, technically flawed. For example, it would have applied to folks like Bluebird LLC, right? It's like not what it wanted to accomplish.
Right.
So it had a lot of issues. That said, what our position on what our caucus position was, the Democrats' position on the floor was, let's take this bill, which sought to address a real issue, which is that we have large multinational institutional investors that are purchasing single-family homes. And the indications are that rising phenomenon is having an impact on rents.
Yeah, sure, it makes sense.
And what we said was not, let's pass this bill, which we thought was problematic and we had not researched well enough yet. But our position was an amendment that would have changed into a study committee that would have investigated the issue in the legislature and pointed us toward any potential legislative paths we might want to take. So we did not support the bill as written, but we supported the creation of a study committee to look at the impact of large institutional investors buying up single family
So for now, it's off the table.
It is off the table.
Okay, and then the other thing, I mean, real estate's a big deal around here, so if you don't mind spending time, is this whole idea of the ADUs, the dwelling units that that could be, instead of just being separate, they could, no, instead of being attached, they could be built separate. Right. And the other one I thought was interesting is that if it's a half acre, the towns couldn't prevent, if you're on a municipal system, to someone build on a half acre lot if it's on a sewer system. So one is just the merits of those things, and the other one is that it's also a discussion between state and local control.
Yeah, I was to that. I have a colleague on Commerce who she's a Democrat, and she got up against the bill, I think it was 2 years ago. And we were all kind of stunned, but she explained, she lives in Nashua. She said, we don't have the infrastructure to support, like the sewer system. She said, you know, you're allowing people to put in an ADU in the back of a house, and the system can't support it. So, and it's different in every municipality, every town. So I think that's the argument for local control there, and that made sense to me.
But this is, I mean, wasn't this supported by a Republican or some Republicans? Because, you know, it's funny how these things cross the aisle here, because it's like anti-snob zoning is what I think whoever sponsored the bill was. Yeah. Because, you know, places, a lot of bedroom communities have like a 2 acre minimum. I think there are some places that have 5 acres, like in Exeter or someplace. But so what do you think about the state versus the local control on this particular issue?
Well, David's a guru. I'm going to pass it to him.
Okay.
But I have my comments.
I was really looking forward to
No, I want to make sure they're accurate. Go ahead.
So I think a lot of these bills are iterative, right? So we had that bill 2 years ago. It was very well intentioned. We learned about problems that individual communities would face in implementing it. Right. And now we have another bill back. And I think we, for example, learned from that specific concern, which wasn't only that member's concern, but might pertain to several communities around the state. And the bill has changed to accommodate that, right? So it says there has to be adequate sewer capacity or septic capacity in the new iteration of that same bill. I think on the ADU question, you know, I think it's a good bill in my opinion. I want to make sure the details are right, but you know, empowering a property owner to build a detached unit for their aging parent, for their child who otherwise cannot find housing, I think it's a very positive thing for communities. We just need to make sure that we get the details right on things like the sewer and septic requirements. We need to ensure that towns like ours can ensure that they stay housing. Yeah. But I think if we get those things right, it's a good thing. And what's the purpose of zoning, right? I support local control over zoning, but for what? It has to be for our health, our safety, or our general welfare. So, you know, where communities are implementing, to use Joe Alexander, the chair of housing that you mentioned, his term snob zoning, you know, those zoning ordinances shouldn't be about shutting people out. It should be about, this is a legitimate health concern, a legitimate safety concern, or a legitimate concern about our general welfare. If it's not, that ordinance probably shouldn't exist. So
well, and what's interesting is that you get into you know, whose ox is being gored on control, right? If you're a local community, you don't want the state to control you. But if you're a homeowner, you don't want the local community to control you, right? So if I have property, I want to put an ADU.
Just to that point, again, the same individual who's a dear friend of mine, I think a lot of us were stunned when she said, this is going to impact the value of my property, and I don't want that.
I mean, because lower it?
Thought it would lower the value of the property if there were ADUs in her community, which may or may not be true. But, you know, I think that's the snob element.
I think the purpose was really sound. I think the opportunity, as David said, to provide additional housing, particularly for family members. We're an aging state. We need a place to keep our loved ones and our parents, or if we're caregivers, there, instead of putting them in nursing homes or places we can't. We're old New Englanders. We want to take care of our families, but we can't now. In many places, you can't afford to. You have no space. So I think that one of the selling points when initially came by was you're going to have the opportunity to do that. As David talking about a younger thing, I'm talking about the older generation here having that place. The flip side of that, Mark, is I think sometimes we hear, and David and I heard it the other day we had a meeting, after the meeting, about some people who they've done that, and then now they have, wow, now I have an ADU, and my father's passed, and now I have an open property. And I've already used how to manipulate the services to get in there from my ADU, fully well intended. But now it's there in my house. Now that's a rental.
Is that bad or good? I mean,
Oh,
what's wrong with that?
on one side is excellent because it provides more housing.
Right.
On the other side, it just opens up a whole new thing of where you may not want rentals in private areas, residential areas, and small overworked areas. I mean, there's a difference between taking care of your loved one who's next door or attached to you than not. So I think there is the flip side. I can understand the concern, but I do think it has a huge value of helping families.
All right. Now, is this passed? Did it pass? Is this one passed too?
It has not yet. It hasn't hit the floor. It may be coming up next week.
Okay. Let's move on to everybody's other
in
favorite.
committee, I mean.
Everybody's other favorite topic with is education.
Oh.
So the hot button was the EFAs, the Education Freedom Accounts. I mean, in summary, this has been going on for a few years now, where if you meet a certain income threshold, you can get $5,200, I think, from the state, and you can use that money for homeschooling or to subsidize your tuition bill in a private school. And I think the governor, I think Anita, you said before we were on or someone said that she kind of flipped, or said Steve, you said both sides of the coin when she was giving her speech yesterday, but what I read, or we have in a story, is that she said she wants to have it open-ended, and they could have any income.
Right.
Nita, go ahead. That's one of your favorites. I know that.
Well, again, I have a problem with that, and I'll start by saying Arizona did that. They took away the limits on income for a similar program, and they're having serious financial problems. So go look and check out with their budget. Go check that out and see how that impacted them, which was ended badly. And I have a problem with using taxpayer money, and a lot of taxpayers feel the same way. Using taxpayer money to pay for private and religious schools, some of who the kids were already going there. And why are we giving these people $5,200 to send them to these schools? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Steve?
Oh.
I know. Let's just say how much now, and you guys know this obviously, but how much it's costing, about $20 million now in the budget?
24.
How much?
24.
24, and if it's open-ended, it could go to 100 million?
Over 100 million.
Over 100
She said 44 million next year, I think she
No,
said.
it was 88.
Huh?
44 times 2 years, 88. But it's going to be more than
Oh,
that.
I can't do the math.
If they go that way. The concern is, this goes back to the ADU bill. This goes back to the intent of the bill. The intent of the bill is to take low-income people and allow them the opportunity, this is not working, to help them out. That was the intent. That bill never went through a committee. Never, ever, ever. Our former representative and our former senator put that in the back of the trailer bill. That was never discussed on the floor. That was never voted on the floor. That was snuck in or rammed up, however you want to frame it. So now we have that bill, which has missed the intent of that. As Nita said, when it first started, 84% of the people would never ever attend a public school. I had a bill last year trying to require, if you're going to do this, if you're going to opt out, which is opting out of the public system, at least have been to public school K through 12 at least 1 year. Never made it out of the House. Never made it out of the committee. Oh no, we shouldn't do that. Well, how can you say it's not working for you if you haven't tried it? I don't like vegetables. Your kids still have to eat them. Try them once before you spit them out. I mean, you got to try it. So that's what we're doing. So now we're going past that margin. They want to go for that level to 300 last year. They try to get 500% in. Oh, we'll go back to 400%. There's increasing that. But now everything's off. If you were sending a youngster to Brewster for $45,000 or somewhere else at Walpole for $55,000 a year, you're not worried about the $5,000. You're taking them out of public school, and you're already paying your taxes for that youngster. When in committee, when we asked the commissioner 4 years ago when he brought this wonderful idea forward, and asked about that, when he only budgeted $172,000, that's all they put in there. It's the only budget line in the budget that didn't have a line. Just keep filling it, dump it in, all right? He said, and I asked him, I said, what's going to happen to the people who already have the kids in school and are paying for the time? His answer on record was, oh, those people would never take that money. Why would they do that? They wouldn't take that money.
I mean, the wealthy people who are sending the kids to Bruce.
I said, wait a minute. Commissioner, you're saying here's $5,000 to help. You're going to say no? Why do you think they have money? They're not stupid. They're business people. You know? No, keep it. No, absolutely not. So now this would be $100 million. It's totally wipes out. And on the time when we're cutting the budget, time when revenues are going down, we're taking this money in for no good purpose. There's no oversight. There's no testing to see how well they're doing. And of course, they can't go to religious school. They can play that game all day long. But I give it to David. David gives the religious school. What's the difference? The bottom line is we're going to pay $100 million easy before this next biennium is done, if that goes through.
So how do you really feel about it? Now, I just want to point out, David, before you comment on it, is that there's different types. People say, oh, we want to have alternatives for kids and choice and all that, but we also have another level of that, alternative schools, which are the public charter schools, like the Woodland charter schools. This has nothing to do with that, because that gets its own pot of money from a different place, right?
Correct.
So this is just about those vouchers, specific vouchers.
Correct.
Any thoughts on it?
I don't have too much to add. I mean, I think, if money were no object and we had money to throw around at everything, go for it. But we're not providing enough adequacy for our existing public schools. So it's just I don't see why this would be the priority. And I have the same concerns about accountability.
All right, so let me add
it's public dollars that we are not having transparency and sufficient transparency into how it's used. I think Amazon is still the largest recipient of the funds, and we don't have any.
Which gets to the other thing about, there was a bill that was defeated, or a proposed bill about having the Department of Education administer this instead of the Children's Scholastic Fund.
Yeah.
Children's Scholarship Organization.
The what?
Children's Scholarship Organization.
Scholarship Organization. I can't read my writing, but they take 10% of this, right?
Up to 10.
Up to 10. So that's no control, all that.
No, and it's not even out of New Hampshire. It used to be a two-person office. Now they have 12, and they're run out of New York. They're not even a registered nonprofit in New Hampshire, so you can't even go back and check and see where that money went or how it went. Last year, the Department of Education did an audit, finally an audit on this thing. An audit. They only took 50 from year one and 50 from year two, 25%, 1/4 of everyone in the audit of 100 shouldn't have been there.
Yep.
They weren't even qualified, and they're already getting the money. Now we have to give it back. They have to see how that's going to work for you. This is not. It's no oversight, Mark. There's no oversight. So why wouldn't DOE, if you're going to run the damn thing, why wouldn't DOE? They have your SASSA number, the student number. They say you qualify here. There you go.
Yeah.
You can do anything you want with the money.
Anita, do you think, this is a question I've asked before, but I mean, the Republicans are in favor of this, and I think everybody conceptually is in favor of a choice. I mean, just have a choice. You got the public charter and you can homeschool, but do you think that they really consciously trying to undermine the public education system?
Yes, I do. I think it's mirroring what's going on at the federal level, where President Trump has said he wants to dismantle public education. So yes, I do. I think that a lot of things going on, and that's going to be my next article for the Sun. Project 25 is coming to a theater near you in New Hampshire, and you look at a lot of these bills and you look at a lot of the things going on, they're mirroring what they're doing in Washington. So yes, I think it's an effort to undermine the public schools.
David, do you think they're really trying to undermine public education, or just give a choice?
I think there are individual people who are trying to undermine public education. Do I think every single person who is voting to support this feels that way? No. But I think that it is, that underlying this is a feeling from certain individuals that our system of public education is not what they want. I think there are those individuals who feel that way. And a lot of them are driving.
Yeah, okay, Steve's eyes are lighting up here. We're running out of time, so keep this tirade down to a minute, will you please?
They have choice right now. They have choice. You don't have to send your youngster to school. You can go anywhere you want. And the reality of $5,000, if you can't afford to send your youngster to where you want to send them, $5,000 is going to help you. My other concern about this is folks who aren't aware. We saw this initially when it started. Who said, "Oh my gosh, I'm not making any money. I have a couple of young kids at home." I said this before. A couple of young kids at home. Well, it's only grade 1. It's only grade 2. I'll keep them at home. That's $10,000. Okay, that's going to help pay my mortgage. It's going to feed those kids. I got a feeding thing I want to talk about. That'll feed those kids, right? Okay, but now what happens? As soon as you take that bill, you sign up. I am no longer going to receive any special ed services. None. You have to give that up. You're giving that up. Federal right. You do. Yeah.
Oh, with the 5,200. You do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So now you give that up, and now you say after 2 or 3 years, you say, "Geez, you know what? Johnny can't read, can't write, can't count to 5." All right. So you put him back in the school, and now that poor youngster, for the rest of his life, is going to be behind trying to catch up. Grade level forever. And the system is not made for that. It's going to be over and over, more cost, more cost, more cost. So it's not cost effective for public education. You don't think public education is doing a good job? Think about this. You give public education $3,700. You give vouchers $5,000. You give charter schools $7,100.
Yep.
And yet, as David said before, if you have all this money, put it in public education, make it robust. And if it doesn't work, take it out.
Well, I'm a big, believe me, I'm a critic for public education like a lot of people are, but I just have a beef with it. I'm just taking my tax dollars with no control. I mean, everybody contributes to the collective. We want good schools and police department, but the fact it's just going to somebody and nobody has control over it, that's my issue there. All right, so what about this House bill? Is it House Bill 283?
House Bill 283, yeah.
All right, so go ahead, Steve.
It's a simple free stater bill.
Only
have one free stater bill.
Free stater, okay.
Free stater,
so
absolute free stater.
Do people know what that is? Huh? Do people know what a free stater is?
Yeah, I think everybody knows what a free
Yeah,
state.
do what they want. He and his actually his wife was on that bill, but yes, free stater, and he allowed his bill was to because test scores are so poor, we need more theoretically. That's his theory. That we need more time on test scores, more time on the basic fundamentals. And to him, the basic fundamentals were math, science, English, and phys ed. That's all we got to teach in high school. That's it.
Okay, so the premise of the bill was to what? To reduce
put more time on those basic academic things, so you can be more academically prepared.
But wait a minute, when you have more time on that, means you're not doing something else.
You aren't. They're gone.
Okay,
all the
that's
other
the
subjects
point.
are gone. Art's gone. Music gone. History's gone. Civics gone. So all gone. Now think about this. If those are all gone, how excited is it going to be for you to go to school if you're an artist or you are a musician, or how often you're going to go back to public school? So we don't need all those. We don't need all those teachers.
But it didn't target those things that they can't be taught. Didn't it just lower the requirements?
No, that's required. That's graduate. That's requirements, and graduation is one thing. That's local, but they have to adjust that for the state. The state said you have to have 20, but what you put in that 20. They're saying that bill said we're going to take everything else, and then once your school gets up to standards, whatever those standards happen to be on the test score, then you can start putting stuff back in if you choose to. Well, it's going to take 10 years. Let's say 10 years maybe. So all of a sudden now, you don't need an art teacher, you don't need a civics teacher, you don't need a music teacher. Where are they going to go? They're not going to sit there and collect checks. They're going to be gone.
Okay, so right now,
there's an underlying reason there.
Okay, so I don't think I don't understand this. So right now, if you're a local school, Kenneth, you have to provide certain types of classes. It's state required.
State
you
required.
have to have, You have to have a art.
This is the minimum public school.
Adequacy.
Okay,
They're not talking about quality, they're talking about the courses, for like
Right.
4 years of English and science and math.
So if that's reduced, then it would be up to the local school districts to say, oh, we're going to chop this just to this.
Because under the intent of that bill, you couldn't offer this, and this until your scores got up to a level that were equal
I mean,
to.
you literally couldn't offer
That's
arts.
right. And if they did, then you could put some back in. It's just.
David?
Go ahead.
No, good.
The other thing I was going to say is I think my opinion is that the goal here is to reduce the definition of adequacy so that localities have to be the ones to decide if they're going to foot the bill for it. I think this is part of trying to lower the state requirements so that the state has less responsibility to foot the bill.
Right.
So when we're talking about our local property taxes, it's all of a sudden if art is optional, if civics is optional, if all these social studies areas are optional, the state, when they get taken to court, is not going to have to pay enough in adequacy to fund that. And if we want them, we would have to fund them out of our local property taxes. So my take on it is that it's this attempt to reduce the definition of what an adequate education is at the state level is really an attempt to reduce the state's obligation.
Right.
And if we want those things for our kids, it's going to be out of our property tax dollars, and our property taxes will go up. So that's my take on it.
That's an excellent point, Mark, because we have two huge cases sitting. You have to relook at the Claremont case and the Rand case. If they get turned over, because now the judge last year tried to compromise. Okay, let's make it it should be $9,000. Let's make it $7,000, and we'll go with it. And the legislature wouldn't buy it. I mean, soon send his AG to say no, they don't need all that money. So if that's another part. If those courses are gone and the costs are less, if they lose, that's less they're going to have to pay back.
Okay, so did this pass?
Well, no, it's in committee. It came out of committee. It was my committee last week.
Okay.
It lost 18-0. I was happy to say I was the second.
It lost.
It lost 18-0.
So it has no traction then.
Well, it has no traction. It's going to come as ITL, but it doesn't mean it can't be brought to the floor. I don't think it has traction.
Oh, 18-0, it's not going to go.
We had 3 hours and 45 minutes of testimony at 3 minutes apiece. And we had 30,000 people, the most of any portal, 30,000 people online, all against. So out of all that.
Okay. We only have 4 minutes left. Annie, do you have anything more to say about that?
That particular bill? Yeah. No, I think I'm really pleased that I didn't know it was 18-0. I'm really pleased to hear that.
I wanted to ask David about the Rooms and Meals effort that you had, and maybe you could explain that and it got shut down.
Yeah, I was actually, normally I'm not surprised when something gets shut down, but I was surprised at this one because we had a good bipartisan team that was behind it. We had everyone from the Coos County delegation behind it. Senator Dave Rochefort from Littleton was behind it. So I was actually hopeful on this one.
And what were you proposing?
So currently, we are not able to provide data. And I've been asked this many times by our selectmen, by just everyday constituents. We are not able to provide data about how much Meals and Rooms revenue we produce in Conway, and the same is for any town in the state. The reason we can't provide that data is because we are not collecting it. And when operators report in their revenues, they report it at the county level, but they report it on a single consolidated form. So if you are a chain and you have 10 establishments across the state, you may earn 90% of your revenue in Carroll County, but report all of it in Grafton, say, or Rockingham, or wherever. So the data that we do have, the reports that we receive, are also very misleading. So even the data that is provided to the public is very misleading. I saw this as a government transparency bill. I saw it as, we have a right to know where this revenue is coming from. I was very disappointed that it didn't pass. And what I have heard from folks who were in the private meetings before the decision was made was basically, they don't want us to know.
Right,
to put it frankly, because they are worried that will highlight the inequity about how much various communities put in versus get back.
And I assume you sponsored, you're interested in this because if we know how much we're providing, we have a better chance of getting some of that back, more of it back as a local community.
I mean, I think on principle, we have a right to know. I mean, that's basically what I said in committee is, because there was one question about, will this start a conversation about, how the distribution formula works for the chunk of it that comes back to municipalities. And I said, of course that conversation will happen. It's happening now, though. Right. Do you want it to happen with accurate data that we have a right to or not? Because we're not going to stop talking about the issue that tourist communities like ours face. And I personally feel that it's wrong to be consciously withholding this data about the revenue that's coming out of our various communities. So that's my take on it. I will plan. I expect it to die on the floor now. It died. Was the recommendation out of committee was inexpedient to legislate. It hasn't hit the floor yet, but I expect it to die when it hits the floor. I would like to bring it back again and again until we get it done, because I just think it's wrong that we are not allowed to access that information.
Okay, so we are basically out of time. Do you want to make a prediction for the next 6 months in 30 seconds?
In terms of
anything.
Cannabis is dead for the next probably as long as the governor is in office.
All right, so Steve, what's on your radar for 6 months?
well, we saw it at the food we didn't get to talk to. I think you're going to see a significant reduction in services by the New Hampshire Department of Education that will align with and parallel the federal government.
David?
I would echo Steve. I think we need to be paying attention to the budget above all this year. I think we were painted a very rosy picture in the budget address, and knowing what we all know about all of our liabilities and the loss of the federal dollars that we've been receiving, that rosy picture just cannot be the case. So I think as we get into the details over the coming weeks and months, I would just say we all need to be paying attention to where those cuts are hitting and how it's going to impact our communities.
And what our local communities are going to have to pick up.
Exactly.
Well, it's been a pleasure. You guys are very informative, even if you are all Democrats. And,
That's why we're informed.
we'll see if you're still here in 2 years.
Ooh.
But hey, thanks a lot, and take
pleasure.
care, okay?
Thank
Our
you.
pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.